I must actually come and live here and walk down the stairs and up the stairs. How do you experience that?
I love it. It keeps me fit. I love coming home and I get closer to the sound of the sea. And I grew up in this area, so to me this is real home.
So how does it feel after so many years in exile to be back home in the environment where you lived as a young man?
That was part of my return. When I was released from 90-day detention, I ran to the sea. It's a long distance. I'd never run so much in my life. And flung myself into the waves here in Clifton. The last time I was arrested, I was in a little apartment in Clifton, driving, getting the beautiful view before I'm locked up in jail. I used to climb Table Mountain, so I'm very much a creature of this part of the world.
What does the sea personify for you? Does the sea personify for you?
The sea. I'm not a sailor, not even a swimmer, but the sea for me is imagination. It goes out there, you just see the surface, there's all sorts of stuff going on underneath, it's endless, you don't know what's on the other side. It's got currents and emotions, the color changes, the sound changes. It's a very vivid part of my psyche, if you like.
So to what extent does that influence your involvement in a political struggle for freedom for all people in the country?
Well, interestingly, Clifton, which has now become the personification of super rich people, and there are super rich people living up on the mountainside, was the home of many people who were in the revolutionary struggle in South Africa. It was offbeat, it was barefoot, it was alternative. And the Buntings put up their home on the mountainside so they could run away if the cops were coming. So when you chose where to build your house, you took advantage of the topography. And I don't think there were ever apartheid signs on Clifton Beach. Maybe because it was so not exclusive, difficult to get to, the signs didn't go up. But we used to have parties, people came from the townships, from the flats, and especially New Year. Somehow Clifton became almost like a tiny little liberated zone for 24 hours. We had poets and interestingly many people from the gay community felt safer here, die 60ers, the Afrikaans, cultural people from the 60s. Second Beach was their place, feeling a little bit vervreemd van die Engelse, but they would have their spot with their towels and so on. So Clifton in that sense had quite a strong alternative history. And for me, in that sense, it was a shelter and a comfort and very, very beautiful.
How did that influence your political life in terms of living in an environment which is where people from the other side of the Cape Town were difficulty to get here? Either issues of transport, issues of racial discrimination. But
well,
also
interestingly enough,
class.
in my case, when my mom brought her two little bikkies down from Johannesburg, she separated from my dad. She stayed with Sissy Gool and Sam Khan on Glen Beach. Then she moved over here and she was the typist for Moses Kotani. And Uncle Moses, she would say, tidy up, Uncle Moses was coming. And it wasn't Moses Cohen, it was Moses Kotani who was coming. And Moses was, comrade Uncle Moses was staying with Eddie Roo in a flat in Clifton. So in that sense, what's now become the epitome of super wealthy people, in those days now, I'm thinking about the late 30s, was an alternative kind of bohemian place where in fact African people, people from the color community, white people, had some contact through their political connections. Those were my very first memories.
How did that influence your, on the one hand you're saying the sea provides for you a vision of the future, but it also allows you to search further deeper into what you actually can't see. So to what extent does that influence your outlook on a South Africa which was deeply racialized? We had heavy atrocities committed against the majority of his citizens.
It was painful. I used to climb Table Mountain every Sunday. I was a very keen mountaineer at one stage, quite a good, with ropes and everything. And I'd stand at the top and I would hate what I saw. And when you hate beauty, there's something awful. Because you look down and you see, where are the whites living? All the beautiful areas. We are people of color living far away in the flats. And it distressed me. And it became one of the themes of my life to see the beauties of South Africa now being appreciated and enjoyed by everybody. And to, as we're talking now, there's a battle going on, what's going to happen to Maiden's Cove, right next door here. And is it going to become just another developed area for basically white, maybe a couple of wealthy black people to move in, strengthening the segregation of Cape Town? Or will it become like an open park, a beautiful area of recreation that people can come in their bakkies and by bus and taxis and so on, at least for weekends, and feel this is their outlet, their contact with the sea, in addition, of course, to Clifton, Camps Bay and elsewhere.
The first time I met you was at a restaurant in the city of Cape Town. I think it was at the Loft, close to the Loft Hotel. And it was during the time that there were preparations for President Mandela to appoint, obviously through the appropriate processes, the Constitutional Court judges. I asked you at that time that if you were asked, would you serve? And you indicated, of course I would serve the citizens of the country, and it would be a pleasure for you to serve. At a difficult time in South Africa's transition, why did you consider it to be a pleasure to serve on the Constitutional Court?
Even pleasure doesn't capture it. A joy, a thrill, a vocation, an expression of self, a culmination of years and years and years of struggle. And we've got this wonderful constitution that we battled over for so long. And now I'm part of the court that is defending those values for which my parents fought, for which my generation fought, for which younger people fought and died. To be on the court defending those values and upholding them, for me was absolutely thrilling.
Your own experience is that you knowingly went into exile, knowing the difficulties that you're going to face as those leaders that fought from foreign soil for freedom in South Africa. You were essentially bombed. You came back, you served on the Constitutional Court appointed, and you still believe that justice for all. Why is that? What
Not
makes
still
you
believe, even more I believed in that. And you know, I don't even like the word serving. Serving makes you sound like you are recruited and you're obeying. I'm expressing myself. It was a combination of idealism, passion, sensitivity, language, the literary side, imagination, people, humanity. It had an artistic dimension, a rational dimension. It was a form of living, okay, wearing a gown, being called Justice Albie Sachs, but living to the full, stretching. We worked till late in the night, my poor clerks. I would say almost, feeling almost like half an exploiter, but proud of exploiting them. We're working till midnight because we're going to get this right, and you're going to feel the joy of expending yourself, body and soul, in relation to something that you believe in very, very, very deeply. So I don't see it as service. I see it as a kind of expression of life, of idealism, of thought, of language, of rationality, and of hope, and of skepticism. You have to be very, very careful and cautious about the things that can go wrong and the people, sometimes in the name of the good, who can do very bad things.
You're using idealism and skepticism in the same articulation of your joy and your happiness to be on the bench. Why is that? Why to use those two opposites?
They're opposites, and I think there's a very significant relationship. We've got to be skeptical. We've got to challenge. We've got to critique. We've got to take nothing for granted. But we mustn't be cynical. Cynical means there's hope is destroyed inside, and it taints everything. And it doesn't allow humanity to express its better nature, its angels, if you like. Skepticism means your feet are on the ground. You're looking truth in the eye. You're unafraid. In that sense, it's skepticism and freedom go hand in hand. But cynicism is, to my mind, a kind of a toxic thing that undermines, that defeats, whereas skepticism strengthens and promotes.
In 2013, you made it very clear the importance of the leadership of Albert Luthuli, Oliver Reginald Tambo, and Mandela, and you spoke about some of the values. Clearly, it seems to me and to many of the citizens that that type of leadership that they displayed over decades, you have found some connection to that.
I feel very much part of that generation. Albert Luthuli, in a sense, prefigured Mandela. Very different. I can't see Albert Luthuli being a boxer. He didn't have that kind of swagger and poise and slightly irreverent humor that Madiba had. But he had that openness, that warmth, that embrace, that listening to everybody. And he would say, bring in Moses Kotane, I want to hear what the workers are saying. Right. He enjoyed listening to alternative voices. Mandela also had that kind of approach. Oliver Tambo, even more so, if it's possible, even more so. And I think it's important to also dispel a notion that's very strong in this country, that somehow the external leadership in the struggle days was top-down, commandist, authoritarian, in the nature of things. Sometimes people try and defend it from Lusaka. It wasn't like that at all. Oliver Tambo was a natural democrat. He listened to everybody. He said the ANC is the parliament of the people, which meant you hear all the different voices. He was looking for consensus. He was very, very sensitive. I can remember when all the BC people came pouring out of the country, crossing the borders, wanting to come back and fight with a gun in the hand, destroy apartheid. They saw Oliver Tambo, who's this guy in his safari suit, softly spoken. They wanted a revolutionary leader. Right. And who was the revolutionary leader? Yes, oh, they loved Yusuf Dadoo with his pipe, picture of Lenin. And there were other leaders like that. Joe Modesi could be powerful and commanding. And here was soft-spoken OR. After 3 or 4 years, OR became their hero. Very fascinating. He would listen. He took people seriously. He thought about their living conditions, problems inside the movement. He was in touch with their parents, their families. And it's extraordinary how much that generation was influenced by him. When it came to taking decisions, should there be whites on the national executive, some people said, come on, oh, are you the leader? You believe in non-racism. He said, no, the movement must decide. When it came to the question of whether torture can be used against captured enemy agents, he loathed that idea, but he didn't think he as president must ban it. He said the movement must take a principled decision. We discussed all those questions. It went out to the branches, went to a conference. He didn't stand up and speak and say, I believe this, come on now, support me. When it came to voting for the national executive, until then, he had appointed everybody. He's sent out by the movement. You can't have elections in an ordinary kind of a way. Now many years have passed. It's 20 years in exile. And he says we need a Congress to elect the leadership. They said, well, comrade, you make up a slate. He says, no slates. secret ballot. Everybody must vote. Tell us at least who you like, because you're the only one who knows. People are traveling around on special names, code names, in Angola, in the camps, international diplomacy. None of us know the others because of the nature of a movement working in semi-secrecy. You're the only one who knows. In the end, he said, I don't like it, but I'll give you 30 names to choose 20 people of people I have confidence in, and you can vote for anybody else as well. He absolutely insisted, I am not the leader who lays down the law and you must be loyal to me. He never commanded loyalty. We gave loyalty, partly because he never commanded it. When he would ask me to come and help with some legal things for the movement, a code of conduct, establishing mechanisms for trials of people who had violated the norms of the organization, stabbing, stealing, sexual assault, crashing a car, whatever it might be. He didn't say, Comrade Albie, present yourself in Lusaka. He said, very African style, how's your health? What are conditions like in Mozambique? So slowly, would it be possible for you to come to Lusaka? I know your work is important and it might be difficult, and if you can't come, I'll fully understand. I'll speak to President Samora Machel if necessary to make it easy. Now, when someone says, I fully understand if you can't, you want to say, take me, take me, take me. If someone says, you shall be there, and the middle officials used to say, we've got a conference in Tasmania, you must be there next Thursday with a 30-page paper, and they felt a loyal member, you say, yes, I'm coming, and then people would find reasons for not doing it. He was just the opposite. He would make it easy for you to say no, and then you voluntarily said yes. You wanted to be connected with somebody who appreciated you, who was naturally thoughtful and kind and responsive. You were associating with something that you felt, this is purely voluntary. I'm not serving, I'm not obedient, I'm not loyal, I'm me. And I'm me, a volunteer in the struggle for freedom with a leader who acknowledges that kind of connection and appreciates it. We were so democratic, so much discussion, so much openness, and even on the Constitutional Committee, if one did a paternity test on our Constitution, I know whose DNA will come up, it's Oliver Tambo. Right. All the basic themes. On the one hand, there was pressure for a kind of people's power, leading party, state. On the other hand, pressures for group rights. Would have been a disaster, both of them, for South Africa. He believed in non-racial democracy, a Bill of Rights, full equality for everybody, protecting language, culture, religion, but not for blacks, not for whites, for human beings. Wow. That was already in the 80s. And he didn't say, this is my view, accept it, take it or leave it. He got the movement, the organization to embody those principles, to defend them and to develop them.
Now, if the Mandela era,
can I just tell you a little story, interesting story on leadership? Some leading comrades in Mozambique during those exile days said they're very puzzled about South Africa. Who is the leader of the ANC? Is it Oliver Tambo? Is it Nelson Mandela? You've got to have one leader. Samora Machel was the leader. So I get to Lusaka, and I actually put the question very quietly to Oliver Tambo. Some senior comrades in Mozambique wondered who is the leader of the ANC. Straight away he said, Nelson Mandela. He is the commander-in-chief. He was just saying it to me. He wasn't making a point. Some years later, I'm in touch with Nelson Mandela. I think I tell him the same story. He says, Oliver Tambo is the leader. Each really respected and loved and deferred to the other. As it turned out, the ill health of Oliver Tambo didn't make it a an institutional question. But I'm sure the ANC would have found a way to recognize the very special qualities that each one of them had and created some form of twosome, if you like, in the leadership. And just as they'd had a twosome in the legal practice and in political life in South Africa, they would have managed that. There was never that sense of, I am the leader, listen to me. We have leading positions in the ANC. There was a moment in Lusaka when Nelson Mandela is now reconnected after 30 years for many people, with comrades he hadn't seen all this time, and we're in the hall and it's very exciting and he's addressing us. He sits down, he's then Deputy President of the ANC, the technical term. If you give me a helmet and a whistle and put me in a uniform and you give me an opkiri and a chair and you say you would like me to be the night watchman for the ANC, I will accept that job. Wow. He was making an important political point. He wasn't the Messiah coming out to provide leadership as though somehow he's anointed by history. He was saying, I am at the service of the organization. I'm not sure if he would have made a good night watchman. I think people might have been a bit scared of him because he looked big and powerful, but I could imagine his head would be all over the place. You know, he wouldn't be looking out for crooks. He'd be already thinking about transforming the country. But he was making a very, very strong point at that stage. And then when it came to the first meeting of the NEC, after we'd been elected at the conference at UDW, this would have been in 91, he started off giving the President's address, and one of the comrades stood up and said, Comrade President, you know how much we all admire you and respect you, but our feeling is you don't start with the President's address, which we then all discuss. Open-ended discussion, and you sum up at the end with the President summing up. And Madiba was stung, very patrician. He didn't enjoy it, but he listened, and at the tea break he went up to the person who'd said that, didn't speak about that issue, put his arm around him, as if to say, that's what I want. People must speak what they think. And from then onwards, there were no President's report which you speaking about. There were never slates. There was never that sense of you've got to line up and align yourself with factions and groups and so on. It was always each person spoke his or her mind. It was amazingly democratic and open. And one reason we have the marvelous constitution we have is at that crucial time of transition, Mandela showed what a great leader he was by being a great listener, great at articulating, but not somebody who laid down the line and said, follow me, I know best, not at all. And there were some moments when we had to stand up to him. He was absolutely adamant. Children must get the vote, 15, 16, 17. 3 times the Constitutional Committee sent me to argue with Mandela. He wouldn't sign off. We said 18. The Negotiations Commission said 18. Internationally, it's 18. We don't want people saying the ANC is so desperate they're getting school children to put them in power. No, 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 he would say. The children sacrificed very much for our freedom. But Comrade Mandela, that was 20 years ago. Those children are middle-aged now. No, 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 no. History will prove that I was right. And he afterwards told that story against himself when he wanted to get President Thabo Mbeki to back down, to say a president can be wrong. He told that story against himself. And he listened. Although he was adamant, he said history would prove he was right, he allowed the Constitutional Committee, the negotiations team, to persuade him that he was wrong. And we admired him more for that.
what is very critical is that you're saying presidents can be wrong. In times of difficulties and conflicting arguments, how does the judiciary, you yourself, how did you mediate between difficult questions where it was required from you to show a degree of leadership, if not total leadership? How did you mediate it?
You know, the judiciary is a very extraordinary kind of a body, especially the Constitutional Court. We don't deal with trials, guilty, not guilty, divorce or not divorce, who gets custody of the children. We're dealing with principles, and it's always collegial. And if they're not 8 of us, 8 out of 11, we're not even a court. So that the tension is there between collegiality, respect for each other. I'm amazed. Some American judges call their colleagues stupid and foolish idea and asinine and childish. I'm astonished by that. We would never do that in South Africa. So on the one hand, you have to be very collegial. You listen, you think, you debate, you're representing an institution. On the other hand, you have your conscience. And sometimes it's the loneliest job on earth, being a judge. And you love and admire your colleagues, but you disagree with them. And they're not wicked people, they're not the enemy, they're not reactionaries and so on, but you disagree and you have to stand out. So on the one hand, individual conscience, deep, 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 deep. On the other hand, collegiality. And you're always negotiating that. And that's where the leadership of the institution becomes very important. And I had the pleasure and privilege, an extraordinary experience of being part of a court led by Arthur Chaskelson, who was an extraordinary leader, quite extraordinary, a fantastic legal brain, powerful, strong, creative. I remember Johan Kriegler saying one day in admiration, Arthur, when you grow up, you should really think of becoming a lawyer. So it wasn't easy, you know, to even amaze us who've been around quite a lot. He was great at delegating, at giving tasks to everybody as part of the team. A very good listener, always the last to speak. And then Pius Langer, different from Arthur. Arthur had a authoritative, not authoritarian, authoritative manner. Pius was wise. It was somehow even almost a different stance, softer, quieter, in some ways more subtle, more nuanced than Arthur. They made an amazing team. Life experiences feeding together to get it right. And it was a great, great time in my life for maybe 12 years or 11 years under Arthur, and then another 3 or 4 years with Pius. But it was one person, one vote on the court. It wasn't as though the President of the Court, Chief Justice, had a kind of a power that distanced him from the rest of us. But it was important that often the leader of the court to the public would be the one presiding over the proceedings, the dignity, the posture, the voice, the relationship with the public, the courtesy, the delicacy, the relationship with colleagues. In that sense, leadership on the bench was extremely important.
That leadership that you're talking about, many people argue within South Africa, though not in a majority, that it is easy for judges to make statements on politicians and the political environment. But when the converse happens, a politician speaking about or criticizing judges, it gets considered as interfering with the judiciary. How do we manage that? Because clearly judges are human and politicians are also human. or the different set of rules here?
No, 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 no. There's no difference in the humanity, but there is a difference in the vocation and the role. I can say for my 15 years on the Constitutional Court, I can't remember a single occasion when any judge spoke out on a publicly controversial issue, other than if the courts themselves were directly affected. So it would be the jurisdiction of the courts or criticism of decisions in ways that would undermine the respect for the Constitution. Then we might speak out. And to this day, I'm very, I get interviewed day in and day out, and I say I can answer any question on anything except the interesting questions, because, and I'm not even a sitting judge now, but people might say, oh, Albie, that's the way the Constitutional Court judges think, even though I've been off the bench for several years. And I think by and large you'll find we are very, very cautious. One or two of my colleagues are associated with bodies that support the rule of law, support litigation, and that's their decision and their choice. And I think it's very lively, important to have a pluralism of positions and so on in this country. The defense of the judiciary is basically a defense of the right of people who've been chosen, in our case by the Judicial Service Commission, half of whose members are members of Parliament, appointed by the President. Come on, it's not, we haven't parachuted in, we haven't been appointed by the legal profession or by business interests or by the opposition or by the CIA, whoever people think we might have been appointed by. We were appointed by President Mandela and Thabo Mbeki and Jacob Zuma. And we're given a certain role under the Constitution. And when we were sworn in, Nelson Mandela said, to some extent, he didn't say to some extent, the future of our democracy is very dependent on the functioning of the Constitutional Court. These rules, these norms, these standards, these values have to go beyond who is in office at the moment, beyond the public passions of the moment. There has to be a certain sense of continuity of vision going back to the making of the Constitution. It's expressed through the precedent of our court, through the reasoning that we offer, the arguments that we offer in favor of our decisions. And of course we all loved Nelson Mandela. I'd worked with him in the underground. Arthur Chaskelson had defended him in Rivonia. And how did we show our gratitude? 6 months later, we struck down two important proclamations he made as President of the country, how to handle the first local government elections. And Parliament had asked him to do it. And we said Parliament can't ask him to do it. Parliament must pass the laws itself. It was a profound constitutional principle. And then he showed his qualities as a leader, because he went on television. He didn't huff and puff and say, who are these people? I was 27 years in jail, I appointed them, and now they feel they have the right to strike down laws that are manifestly positive and needed by the society. He said, as President of the country, I must be first to show respect for the Constitution as interpreted by the Constitutional Court. And he emerged with increased prestige. As if to say, and you see what a marvelous country I'm the president of. We live by the rule of law. He embodied that spirit, and that ennobled him. It didn't diminish him. Whereas somebody else might say, who are they? You know, what right have they? And be sour about it. He wasn't like that at all. And to me, these are qualities of the leader who sees his or her role as being part of the historical process, partly a human face to institutions, to political organizations, to the community, but involved in a project that's not about him or her. The project is for the people, it's for emancipation, it's for humanity, it's for the country. It's a project to overcome pain and alienation and disadvantage and separation and indignity. It's marvelous to be part of that project. And a true leader doesn't think, ow, 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 me, why are you going for me all the time? The true leader will say, okay, now why is it that people feel that? How can we engage? How can we talk? Sometimes we can't accept those arguments. They're completely unacceptable. But we talk. That's the South African way. We respect, we listen, we don't go in for argy-bargy. We retain our dignity, even if others are throwing away their own dignity.
Should judges have make statements on politics or political party factions to conflicts within political parties? Should judges at all step into that terrain?
The issue crops up from time to time where people who've lost a political battle inside an organization will take the matter to court. And by and large, the courts have been very reluctant. Your democratic processes have to decide that. Sometimes it's not even just political parties inside faith communities, and there's a case on while I'm talking now where that's one of the issues they have to pronounce on. But if there is a claim that certain very profound fundamental rights have been denied, and this can have an impact on not just ourselves, but on employment, the life of the nation, I don't know, a whole range of different things, then the court might take a different view. But I don't want to get into that terrain too much, because these, in fact, are live issues now. They're live issues now.
Politicization of the judiciary. Many has made claims, especially the dominant media in South Africa, that there's a continuous attempt to influence the judiciary from a political perspective. Has that ever happened? Or are we just hearing the normal rhetoric of politicalization of the judiciary in the same way as people are saying there's a juridification of politics in the country?
Certainly in my 15 years on the bench, nobody ever phoned me or offered me a bribe or pressurized me at all. And I would have been extremely indignant if any attempt was made from outside. Sometimes I wouldn't even discuss the most banal things in relation to the court. You know, that belongs to us. Not even to somebody I'm living with, I'm married to. So I certainly experienced nothing of that kind. The only example we had of alleged pressure of that kind involved one of the judges allegedly speaking to some of our judges. That issue's been in and out of the courts for years, and again, I won't comment on that. But it was so extraordinary and rare that it stands out. That's not the South African way. I'm amazed when I'm in the United States, people speak openly about Republican judges and Democratic judges. We've got nothing like that in South Africa.
There are claims, rightfully or wrongly, that the judiciary gets fed by the legal fraternity. But there seems to be a sluggishness, to slowness in the transformation of the legal fraternity. What ought to be, given that your life has been about non-racialism and looking for those golden nuggets, norms and standards and values and principles on the transformation of society. What do we need to change that legal fraternity so that it's reflective of
well,
South
what
African
I'd like to
society?
say first is that I lived through transformation of the judiciary. Our court, the Constitutional Court, was conceptually transformed from the beginning. We were passionate for the new constitutional order and very, very creative. And it's a joy for me to see throughout the world our decisions are being looked at. I met somebody from the German Constitutional Court, and she said they love looking at the South African decisions because they're so thoughtful and they lay it out, we lay it out. And it wasn't even primarily a question of racial or gender composition then. It was a question of outlook for transformation. We coined the phrase transformation in South Africa. We took it from an American professor and we introduced it into the vocabulary of public debate, discourse. Ours is a constitution for transformation. But the rest of the judiciary wasn't quite the same. And now there's a much more, at all different levels in the judiciary, a sense of real transformation, and it's not just race and gender, it's outlook. And wonderful decisions are coming out from different courts at different levels. And for me, again, it's a joy. You read Oscar Pistorius' case, African woman happens to be sitting in the case, somebody else. You feel the bench is now beginning to reflect our society. The legal profession, much slower. To some extent because it's self-regulated, it's regulated by the market, and the market itself is skewed. You know, who own the capital, who are the big employers of legal services from a particular sector. Basically still white men, by and large, have economic predominance in this country, and that's reflected in the legal profession. What I think is very positive is the issue is out on the table. It's being discussed, and it's not accepted as natural or acceptable at all. It's seen as aberrant. It's seen as what can we do to bring about the change. And my guess is that within a decade we're going to see quite radical change. I think the upheavals at the universities are signs of a new intelligentsia that's more affirmative, more self-confident, more questioning, that for better or worse takes all our gains for granted, which we think are spectacular compared to where we were, and says that's not enough, we want more. And I think I can see energies feeding in now that are going to provide a richness and a texture to the change, not simply in composition, but in values. And I can also imagine, I mean, I'm always looking for hopeful signs, but I can imagine a richness to our legal thinking that is drawn from the soil of South Africa and our people and our struggles and our relationships and our dreams and our fears. In that sense, I'm very, very positive about the future, and I'm very energized by the positivity of the students. There were aspects of the actions of some of them that were quite appalling and terrible, but the main thrust, the mainstream, was so positive. It reminded me so much of our idealism when we were at university, facing different kinds of problems, but the idealism and the passion, it wasn't how can I make more money, how can I become as rich as the other person, how can I have a bigger car than the other person. It was how can I live in dignity, associating with others, proud of myself, my culture, my background, my community. These were questions placed right at the forefront, and I see that as feeding into the next wave, the next generation of lawyers and jurists in South Africa.
Should judges be able to speak out freely about the slowness on the transformation in terms of the legal profession?
I think judges should certainly be concerned, and judges have spoken. But it shouldn't be like a royal command, thou shalt transform because we judges are telling you to do it. It's for the legal profession itself to find the mechanisms. I think the profession accepts the issues and the clamant need, the urgent need for rapid change. And it's much more significant if the institution can transform itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's deeper, it's more likely to be correct, there's less window dressing, it's not based on securing points or advantage, it's based on the caliber and the quality of the institution, the legal representation that's been offered. And it just stands to reason. The more representative the legal profession is, the more the hopes, the needs, the existential anxieties, the material claims of the whole community become part of the debate.
Right.
and that enriches the law and strengthens the texture of the debate. South Africa has led the world in legal aspects in a number of different areas, and I envisage now these new energies providing new layers that go beyond what the Donaldicas and the I.S. Lunders, the Tolly Madalas, and the Albie Sachses were saying at a certain generation.
Right.
With fresh visions and fresh ideas, maybe building on the positives that we brought to the table, finding the uncreated solutions.
Riveting. Can I ask you, you saying a 2011 headline of a foreign newspaper says, Albie Sachs, the things I won't tell my son. Give us insight into that from your perspective, because always, if one articulates what the journalist is saying, they might have misunderstood or interpreted what you're saying.
It's a very poignant thing. I went with my son Oliver, then age 5, to the spot where I was glad in the future. I wanted him to hear from his daddy why his daddy looks funny, has a short arm. And we were being filmed there. And I found I could tell him going to the beach, and boom. I could tell him about being in hospital, I'm blind, I can't see, discovering I've lost my arm. I could tell him that the doctors were kind, they helped me, I didn't feel any pain. I could tell him all that. I don't want to tell him about black and white fighting. I want him to know, I want him to learn, but not from me.
Right, right.
Not from me. I was so happy one day when he said, he came from school, and he said, somebody said your daddy lost his arm fighting for freedom. And I was happy because fighting for freedom was a good thing.
Yeah.
You know, that thrilled me. But I didn't want to say, I was fighting for freedom, I was a freedom fighter, you know, listen to me. Somehow he's got to find his own way. I hate if my parents put in their values and thoughts automatically on me. I'm thrilled I grew up in what wasn't a normal family. We never celebrated birthdays. To this day I don't celebrate birthdays. But we knew all the victories of the people in struggle.
Right.
And it was a different kind of a world.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to tell him that his mommy and I would not have been allowed to live together, to kiss each other, to conceive him.
Right.
Let him find out about apartheid in the way that other kids don't.
My last question to you is, given your years of work and experience, and yes, serving where you can, helping where you can, and influencing where you can, what is your lesson? What would you tell leaders today, whether they're in business, in civil society organizations, in political circles, in government, and outside South Africa, in the globe? What are the key things that you'll say that they need to be aware of if they're in leadership positions? And also those on the serving in professions like the judiciary.
I'm very reluctant to offer advice. It comes out like pontification. I hate the passion, the rawness of our lives to be subsumed into a few snappy phrases. And that's a vanity, if you like, a conceit. It was rich, it was difficult, there were terrible moments, there were moments of not quite despair, but bad things were happening inside our own struggle, in our own movement and so on. It's all complicated, I can't go through all that. But what I'm saying now, many people say, Albie, is this the country we're fighting for? And I say, it is the country we were fighting for, I was fighting for. It's not the society. And I think it's important to make that distinction. I think South Africa in many ways is a magnificent country, and I'm not just speaking about the sea and the mountain. We pulled it off. Nobody gave us a chance after 300 years of oppression that black and white could live together as equals in one country. Forget about it. A racial bloodbath was predicted. I'd lived in Mozambique. There'd been the triumph of the revolution, and within years, armed struggle, millions of refugees, people walking around without legs because of the mines, total destruction of the project. We've got the country, and by our country I mean a country with a constitution. Our president steps down after 2 terms. We have free and fair elections every 5 years. Elections count. There are people who've been in office for a long time, they're running scared because of elections. If you lose the elections, like the governing party lost the elections in the Cape, they ceded office. We've got a strong judiciary, independent, upholding the Constitution, a very lively press, civil society organizations, vigorous political debate, inside and outside Parliament, very vigorous, lively, sometimes too lively debates. These are wonderful achievements. On the other hand, we have massive unemployment, we have lots of racism, it's still deeply entrenched, we have corruption, we have all sorts of problems of leadership, many dismaying things, often a refusal to look the truth in the face. So often. But we don't knock the country, the Constitution, what we've achieved because of the dismaying factors. We use what we've achieved to now try and remedy the things that are wrong. We use our democratic freedoms. We use our traditions. We use our cultures of struggle, of honesty. We use the spirit of Mandela and Tambo and Albert Luthuli. Even while I'm talking now, I'm remembering I'm a soldier de Luthuli. You know, it comes back. It's even visceral for me. And in a sense, I think these things are still visceral for the South African nation, people, by and large. Those traditions, the positive aspects of our struggle, the empathy, the Ubuntu, if you like, the solidarity, the integrity, the morality, the sense of a better society was so strong. It held us together even when lots of things were going wrong. That's what I would tell people.
I have to ask you this. Your generation seems to be very strong on the collective versus the individual. We live in a capitalist society where it's driven by rugged individualism, accumulation of power and wealth for the individual relative to others. How do you reconcile? How do you tell the youth to mediate? What are those lessons from your life that allows them some insight as to a learned person like yourself? I don't know that you will probably not like the thought of being called a learned person. But
I love it. I've been waiting to be called a public intellectual for years, and nobody's ever called me one. Nobody's ever called me that.
I'll call you a public intellectual like yourself.
Okay. Interestingly, I'm often asked, what advice would you give to the youth? And I say the only advice I would give to the youth is not to listen to the advice of people like me. Make up your own minds. And lo and behold, they're making up their own minds. It's amazing. I'm saying that partly as a cop-out. I don't want to trivialize and reduce a whole rich, complicated life experience to a few glib phrases. But partly it's that belief. And I say to be as irreverent and challenging as we were when we were young people. But the other thing I've learned, it's not just for the youth. It's for me. Look where I'm living. I never imagined, I never dreamt of, I never aspired to living in a home like this. Money enters into my life in ways that I never sought. They're there. And I find I'm not as generous a person in many ways. My emotions are not as immediately sympathetic and full of solidarity as they used to be. And all I can say is I've got to learn to manage those contradictions. We can't have that intense solidarity of the struggle days. It would be, we're an open society, we're a pluralist society. We can dream different things now. We've got to be looser and freer. It's appropriate. That's the freedom we were fighting for, to get away from the tunnel vision. But I lament some of the crass individualism in myself, in the world I'm growing up in. I'm not sure. So what I'm saying to myself is, Albie, you are surrounded by contradictions. There are contradictions in your life and in your lifestyle. It doesn't mean you don't acknowledge that they exist. You try to manage them in a principled way. And so this phase of my life, in that sense, personally, is managing contradictions in a way that's meaningful. I won a huge prize for the rule of law. I don't believe in prizes, but I didn't. For a moment, I thought I might be the one person in the world who refused to accept $1 million prize. That was out of almost conceit, to show how principled I am, but it would have been odd, it would have been bizarre at this stage in our lives to do that. So then I had to decide what to do with the money. And a big chunk goes to the court artworks. We still have the same old car, slightly clapped out car that we had before. We don't change our lifestyle when it's not necessary just because the money is there. But pay off the mortgage, that's fine. Pay back Vanessa what she put in to build this house, that's fine. Have something there for the children, that's fine. So in that sense, for people who say, okay, we're living in a very competitive society where the market plays an enormous role, we're living in the world of consumerism and celebrities, that's the world we're living in. Don't succumb to it. Don't be filled with lamentations. Try and change that world as much as you can, but navigate within it in as dignified and decent a way as you can possibly manage.
Justice Albie Sachs, thank you very much. Much appreciated.